Hello and welcome back for the Assassin skill change proposal. This small video series is looking to see every single character and what skills either weren't changed in patch 2.4 or could still use some love moving forward, and trying to propose different changes either mechanically to them or in some way sprucing up the skills in general so that they would actually be used. If you haven't seen our Amazon video, I'll go ahead and include a link to it right there for you so you can check that out. In this video, we're going to be covering the Assassin, which definitely has a lot of interesting and niche mechanics. So hopefully we're able to get through them very quickly, just because there's so many skills that could probably use a little bit of a touch up to make them better for the class overall. Starting with the martial arts tree, we're not actually going to begin with a particular skill, but more so changes that I think should be applied across the board so that martial arts is actually something that you can more reasonably pilot, and it would very easily open up the vast majority of builds that otherwise are pretty pigeonholed into a few specific ones. The first fundamental change would be adding some kind of charge up counter to the character screen. With the advent of which hotkeys you currently have mapped out to your character, having a charge up counter would drastically improve the overall playability of martial arts. Right now, especially when the assassin is faded like she currently is, it can become literally impossible to see how many charges you have, whether or not you got a charge on your most recent hit. And considering there are no real special effects in game for whether or not you've hit a monster, you almost can't see whether or not you have charges, especially if you're in the thick of things, which a martial art assassin likes to be. The idea here is that across this bottom bar in some way, or potentially across the side of your bar, you'd be able to see a counter per charge that you have. So if I had 2 Tiger Strike charges and 3 Claw of Thunder charges and 1 Phoenix Strike charge, there would be a skill indicator as well as a number indicator for how many charges there are. Speaking more about charges, they just shouldn't deplete over time. They effectively shouldn't have a duration. You should have them until you use them. Let's use Chaos Sanctuary as an example. After you finish the last seal boss, while waiting for Diablo to spawn, there's no way for you to continue to have charges for when the fight starts. So at the beginning of the Diablo fight, you have to do a bunch of base attacks that don't really do a lot of damage to get your charges back up before you could swap over to using a finisher to get any of the effects that your build is theoretically trying to do. On top of this, if you use an attack on a monster, even if you miss or the monster blocks, you should still generate a charge. It should not be a requirement of hitting the monster to generate a charge, considering you don't even get an effect for getting the charge in the first place. So in a lot of examples, especially with an elemental build like Phoenix Strike, you're doing a bunch of normal melee attacks. So now you have to build to be able to hit with these normal melee attacks, basically doing no damage that are inside of the identity of your build to then be able to get these elemental effects when you use a finisher. And when you have charges with a finisher, they always hit anyways. So it almost doesn't make sense that you need to be able to successfully strike the monster to get a charge. If I take a swing at a monster and just so happen to miss, that shouldn't completely disable my build. The last thing that I'll say about just how charge up skills work in general, again, hearkening to the fact that it's actually really difficult to know whether or not you've gotten a charge. It's almost impossible to see your charges. And if they implemented nothing else, this would at least help to go a long way to make martial arts a more fulfilling build strategy. And that would be getting a minor effect whenever you use a charge skill. If you use Tiger Strike as an example, right now, you do 3 base melee attacks that have no enhanced damage from skill to be able to get a large physical damage payoff, or in the case of using someone like Dragontail, a large elemental damage payoff. Wouldn't it be nice if you were to get maybe half of the effect of the charge every single time that you attacked? So if I have a level 14 Tiger Strike, on my first charge, instead of this 360 damage bonus, I get 180 damage bonus. On the second attack, I would get a 360 bonus. And on the last attack, I get a 540 bonus. Then I'm incentivized to use these charge up moves. I'm getting some benefit out of it that more accurately represents what the build is actually trying to do. And then I can still use a finisher or a normal attack to be able to get the payoff of the higher tier charge skills. The same could be said for anything else. While I'm using Cobra Strike to get charges, I would be getting a little bit of lifesteal and then a little bit of life and mana steal. Either all of these or some combination of these would just go a long way to make the martial arts tree itself so much more viable as a playstyle, especially on Battle.net with ping. All in all, on Battle.net, martial arts feels really bad to pilot, and it's not helping the fact that it's already a clunky playstyle to begin with, and the visual indicators are just non-existent. To talk about individual skills themselves, let's start on the right side with the finishers. I'd say that the only skill that really needs some touching up here is Dragonflight. Dragonflight's an amazing ability. The only thing is that the animation for it and how long it takes is a static amount of time. Faster cast rate and increased attack speed actually do not increase the speed at which Dragonflight occurs over, which is just firstly unintuitive, and secondly makes the skill feel so much worse than teleport that some people even forego it in its entirety. Dragonflight was either an FCR or an IAS based skill, and preferably increased attack speed, considering everything else on your build is going to be looking at increased attack speed for its overall effectiveness. It'd be really nice to be able to speed up the animation for this skill so that teleporting around feels a lot better, a lot less clunky, and just generally creates a much smoother gameplay experience. While there's a lot to be said about Fists of Fire, Claws of Thunder, and Blades of Ice, in general, their damage output just needs to be a bit higher. While you can definitely focus on any one of these skills, and in the early game something like Fist of Fire is actually pretty strong, once you have access to Phoenix Strike, there's almost no reason to use any of the other skills, because Phoenix Strike's damage output tends to eclipse them in their entirety. The benefit of Phoenix Strike is that you're getting multiple elemental damage types in multiple effects. And just like we were talking about in the Amazon previously in our last video, any skill that has a more specialized damage type should probably perform better than any skill that has more utility or access to different damage types. So if you wanted to be pure fire, Fists of Fire skill damage would need to be ramped up just a little bit to give you a reason to do this instead of going with something like Phoenix Strike. And then the same can be said about Claws of Thunder and Blades of Ice. Moving into Shadow disciplines, starting with Shadow Warrior and Shadow Master, I actually think these skills are in a really good place. The only thing that I would like to see changed about them is that they would be able to have their own pool of traps. Right now, you can only have 5 traps in total between you, your Shadow Warrior, or your Shadow Master if you have one or the other summoned. And this means that it makes it a lot harder for you to use stuff like Death Sentry, considering you typically want to use anywhere between 1 to 4 of your primary trap, and then 1 to 2 of your Death Sentry traps. And if your summon is laying down their own traps that are typically going to do less damage than your traps and be placed in worse areas, you're drastically reducing your overall efficiency with that trap layout. If they were to have their own trap pool, and maybe to balance that out, they would have to do less damage than what they currently do, a full Trapsin assassin could rely on having Shadow Warrior and Shadow Master as a summonable tank without worrying about messing up your rotation. Venom is a weird skill where if you put it onto any other class that has access to poison damage, it can get kind of out of hand. But on the assassin, it's almost a trap. While you can generally go 1 point on Venom and it will typically buff any melee build, realistically, the damage output on it, even if you go with a full poison build, just isn't there. There are 2 things I think that you could do with Venom right now to at least change it up a little bit. The first one would be to give it a synergy with one of the martial arts charge up skills. I was thinking Cobra Strike. It's pretty obvious to me that Cobra Strike was supposed to be some kind of poison ability, and then they realized that martial arts assassins have a lot of hard time with survivability, so they swapped it over to Lifesteal, Mana Steal. That might be completely out of left field, but what is it about a snake that means it steals life and mana? I'm not too sure. But if you were to give it a synergy, make it a 40-point investment skill, but increase its overall damage, I think that that's at least a better place than where Venom is right now. The second thing that I would like to see Venom be is actually an enchantment-like buff. So you would be able to cast Venom on your mercenary, you'd be able to cast Venom on your friend's summons, you'd be able to cast your higher level Venom onto your Shadow Warrior or Shadow Master, hopefully stopping them from using the skill. The other cool part about Venom being a buff skill that you could apply to something would mean that items that have charges of Venom would also be able to be used on different targets, so it would just open up the skill in general and make for at least some kind of niche meme builds depending on how it was applied. Weapon block is great, it just needs to work while you're running. I'm not sure why it doesn't just work like normal block does, and I don't think that it's somehow broken for the assassin to have block while running. She has the weapons in her hands, why would she not be able to block an attack if she is able to block an attack with a shield on while she's running? Just doesn't really make sense. Psychic Hammer is a skill that's in a really weird place, but ultimately I think we came up with 2 really good ways to be able to change Psychic Hammer to actually give it a use. The first one would be being able to use Psychic Hammer like telekinesis, at least as far as being able to activate things and use a waypoint. Maybe not necessarily being able to use it on a town portal or a red portal, just so that the sorceress continues to maintain some character identity with how telekinesis works. But Psychic Hammer is literally using the power of your mind to be able to apply kinetic force to the world around it. Why can't I Psychic Hammer a rock, and why can't I activate a waypoint with it? The second thing that I was thinking about with Psychic Hammer, and I'm not exactly sure if this would even make it have a use, perhaps outside of PvP, but if Psychic Hammer were actually a knock towards effect as opposed to a knock back effect. So what do I mean by that? If I were to cast Psychic Hammer on a target, if it were to pull that target towards the assassin, as opposed to knocking the target away from the assassin, it gives you some very interesting and super niche class identity. So the idea of being able to pull a target towards you so that they're closer to your traps or within the threat range of your claws, I feel has so much flavor attached to it. It would give it a really niche use inside of PvP. It might be able to afford you a few more options as far as crowd control is concerned, as well as being able to pull the boss out of a pack or be able to move minions away from a boss. We don't see any pull-in effects in Diablo 2, and I'm not saying it would be easy to code, but it would be really interesting to see how that changes, if it changes anything at all. For the traps, let's knock out the easy ones first. Shockweb has a 1 second next hit delay, meaning that you can only deal damage with Shockweb once a second. And then on top of that, it also stops other next hit delay skills from dealing damage to a target, i.e. Wake of Fire Trap. Shockweb is just in this weird place where you throw it down on monsters that aren't being attacked by your traps yet, but in almost every scenario, you want your trap to be hitting the entire field of monsters simultaneously. So you just can't use Shockweb. Wake of Inferno changes would follow along with something that I'd like to apply to every channeled skill basically, which is have it deal damage within a cone with a reduced radius. So rather than shooting out a single line of fire, shooting out 3 streams of fire in a cone just drastically increases the chances that second to second the monster is being hit by your trap at all. As it stands right now, if the monster moves slightly, you are just losing parts of a second worth of DPS because literally the Wake of Inferno has to very slowly turn to and then shoot out a stream of fire to be able to reach them. And especially at max range, monsters are typically moving before the Inferno even reaches them. Even on a single target where you could drop it right next to a monster, if they move at all, you're just losing out on DPS. And it gets down to the point where, depending on how inefficient it is or how feisty the monster is, Wake of Fire Trap will literally do more DPS just because it's able to do damage consistently in an area as opposed to having to aim. Now let's talk about the blade skills. I'll go ahead and link to my video here about how the blade skills currently work in D2R. There are so many nuances to how these skills work. I'm going to assume you already know how they work, and I'm just going to explain what I think needs to be changed about them with the way that they currently act in the game. Blade Sentinel needs to always hit. It is a trap. All other traps always hit their target. There's no reason why Blade Sentinel should be any exception to this rule. Blade Sentinel also has a 1 second next hit delay, meaning if you throw 2 Blade Sentinels at a monster, it was literally a waste of time, because they can only ever be hit by one of them per second. Either next hit delay would have to be removed entirely from the skill, or reduce it down to the much more reasonable 4-frame next hit delay, which is something that you see on skills like Nova and Frost Nova. If we don't get anything else on Blade Fury, the skill, it literally just needs more attack rating. It is so difficult to be able to stack enough attack rating on a Blade Fury build that you end up sacrificing so much potential damage just to be able to get close to a 95% chance to hit, and in many cases you actually can't get there. The second thing about Blade Fury, I think at this point, realistically, it could pierce. If you're able to get pierce on the skill or pierce on your gear, I think Blade Fury should be able to pierce. It's a projectile. You already are investing so much because it's a channeled skill. Making it a cone seems a little bit too powerful. But if it could pierce and I was able to hit more than one target with this continuous stream of shurikens, that would feel so much better and just drastically increase the overall playability of a Blade trap set. Right now, Blade Shield uses durability on your weapon, while Blade Sentinel and Blade Fury doesn't. So to be able to get the maximum benefit out of these two skills, you use an ethereal weapon. But because Blade Shield actually uses the weapon's durability, you can't use an ethereal weapon. It will eventually break. Blade Shield, like the other blade skills, just shouldn't use the weapon's durability. It's so unintuitive, there's nothing to make you believe that it's going to use durability while the other two don't in any way, shape, or form, that even though I knew this fact when I first built out a Blade Fury to test it, I actually was caught off guard by the fact that my ethereal weapon was breaking, and it took me a hot second to remember that Blade Shield works differently than the other skills. Blade Shield also attacks all monsters within a range adder of 0, and I think bare minimum, if you're not going to give me the range adder of the weapon that I have equipped, it should at least have the range adder of a dagger, so range adder 1. it would just generally increase its overall viability as a skill that you can use, and also make it so much better on a whirlwind assassin build, because quite often you want to be whirlwinding at the edge of a group and short whirlwinding, and there are just a lot of times where you literally can't hit anything with blade shield because you're whirlwinding further away than the skill can actually hit. If blade shield is using its weapon durability, meaning it's attacking with my weapon itself, it should be doing 100% of the weapon damage. Right now, it's only doing 75% of the weapon damage, and while the DPS loss isn't that big, it does mean that my ability to life leech and mana leech is drastically reduced because it's taking a percentage of that effect. Lastly, the mana cost on Blade Shield is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know if you looked at it, but it's 65 mana at skill level 20. This might be a way of stopping you from making an FCR-based big attack weapon Blade Shield build, and then going into the middle of monsters and spamming Blade Shield. But quite frankly, if you want to, at range, at or zero, attack monsters around you by using an FCR melee build, I think we should be able to do so. Bringing it down to even 30 mana would make it infinitely more manageable, but right now that 65 mana cost is just absolutely outrageous. Well, there you go. There you have it. Those are all of the changes that I think need to be looked at and in some way implemented across the assassin, just to make their skills that much more viable, make a couple of the builds that are pretty janky, especially martial arts and the blade traps in, just feel a lot more intuitive, a lot better to pilot, and overall increase their viability. Even if it just means that more people are willing to try out the assassin, her builds are so nuanced that I think a lot of people just default to traps because it's just easier that way. But she's arguably one of the most mechanically interesting classes in the game, and it really upsets me that people aren't willing to explore her more, because even if you spend a lot of time studying her skills, you will walk away with an incomplete understanding of how the assassin works, and there's no reason why the game should be that unintuitive for one of its classes. Let me know what you think about any of these changes. I'd really like to get your feedback. Again, I stream every day, Monday through Friday at twitch.tv/macrobioboy. Please come stop by. We were sitting down with chat as well as Teo1904 while we were thinking about these changes, and being able to bounce them off of each other and being able to theorize about additional changes or different ways things could be implemented led to what I think is a really strong list of overall changes, and I'd love to see you there. I also tried to record this video a little bit faster. I found in my first one I was just speaking a bit slowly, so I hope that this helps, and I hope that nothing's being lost in translation. Let me know down below if you think that this video just did a better job of portraying the information and whether or not the speed was more to your liking. Outside of all of that, I appreciate it so much that you came and watched the video. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.